man, sometimes you get home from a long day of work, and by Thor, you need a little something. You know what hits the spot at a time like that? I'm talking about tacos, of course. What's that? Tacos are a distinctly non-Viking dish. But now what if I told you that we can make 100% genuine, traditional Scandinavian tortillas with just a few basic ingredients that you probably have laying around in your kitchen somewhere? And maybe you're not feeling tacos. Maybe you want to go full traditional. Not a problem. It can also make a very tasty, traditional dessert. I speak, of course, of beautiful, buttery Lefse. Now, if I've managed to color you some shade of intrigue, then stick around and make some Lefse with us for the feast. Now, Lefse is a traditional Scandinavian flatbread. Now, what makes it different from other types of flatbreads out there is that it is much more flexible than any other kind of flatbread I've ever used. It's something more along the lines of like a crepe or like a tortilla. It is often devoured in massive quantities by those of Norse descent around the holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas. Now, while Lefse is fairly easy to make, today I'm going to be enlisting the aid of the most skilled cook in our Viking horde. This cook of legendary repute goes by one name, and one name only. Most of the cooking in this episode comes compliment of her expertise, so be sure to give her a round of applause. Yay! But without further ado, let's get started. For the recipe my mother uses, we'll need 1 pound of russet potatoes, 1 teaspoon of sugar, half a teaspoon of salt, 1/4 of a cup of heavy cream, 4 tablespoons of butter, and 5 ounces of flour. Now, this is just the flour that's going to go into the dough itself. We will need more flour later for rolling it out. So if you just happen to have exactly 5 ounces of flour laying around, you're going to need a little bit more than that. Then going right into the cooking, first you're going to need to peel, then cut your potatoes into cubes. You're going to want to boil those potatoes until they're soft. That'll take approximately 10 to 15 minutes. You're going to drain the water from the potatoes and put your potatoes into a mixing bowl. Mash your potatoes very well until they are quite fine. Throw your mixer on, and while your potatoes are mixing, add your cream, add your butter, and add your salt and sugar. Just basically add everything except the flour. Make sure all of that is thoroughly mixed, and then transfer your mixture over to a bowl, cover it, and let it cool. Once it's cool, we let it refrigerate overnight just to make sure that it's the right texture. I've seen some people say that you can just let it cool for a while out on the counter and then just immediately go straight into the rolling and cooking phase. But if you want to make sure that it stays the right texture and it's not going to rip or anything, I highly recommend refrigerating it for at least a few hours. And while that's cooling in the fridge, I think it's as good a time as any to explore some of the lore behind the history of Lefse. Now, back during the Viking Age, they didn't have Lefse, or at least, well, they had Lefse. It's just not Lefse as we have it today. They still had flatbreads, but they were more like a semi-smashed loaf of normal bread. They didn't have potatoes either in Scandinavia yet until way later in history. So it was a much more crumbly variety of bread. Now, as I've mentioned on the show before, Vikings didn't write much down, and when they did, it was on very perishable forms of stationery. So we actually do not know when we started making Lefse the way we do. Like flat, do not know. Not to worry, however, we made up for our lack of good record-keeping practices with a banging sense of humor. It has actually become common practice to just completely fabricate stories as to when, how, and why we started making Lefse the way we do now. And I'll be reading an ancient excerpt from one of these stories. to you now. Now then, what you know about that? Did you know that Lefse was invented by the Norwegian Vikings? One day, they went and was going to raid Ireland. Well, they got over there, but they couldn't surprise them Irish people, because they were making too much noise coming over across the North Sea from Norway. When they got to the shores of Ireland, they tried to land, but they just couldn't. You see, the Irish heard them coming and began throwing their potatoes at them darn Vikings, so that they could not land. Well, by golly, do you know what? They load that ship with all their potatoes that got thrown at them, pulled out their oars, and finally got back to Norway. And when they got there, they played around with those potatoes and came up with a bread and called it Lefse. That pronunciation was not me being self-racist, by the way. That is literally just how it is written by our good friend Albert Lee from Minnesota over on lefselife.com. Now, I don't have to tell you that this is probably not what happened. Having to improv your history lesson is actually not an uncommon occurrence in Scandinavia, but it really does show that you can kind of make good out of anything. Now, I think after that quick trip to Ireland, our Lefse should probably have cooled down a sufficient amount by now, so let's go check on it. Now, once your dough has been cooled the way you want it, you're just going to need to take it back out, add some flour, and then knead it into the mixture. Then you're going to want to separate your dough into about 6 to 8 chunks of dough that you will roll into balls. Next, you're going to want to put 1/4 of a cup of flour onto a pastry cloth or wherever you're going to be rolling these out. And you're going to want to roll these out until they're thin. Now, a round shape is what you're looking for, but just get as close as you can. It's not a big deal. It tastes the same either way, and honestly speaking, I don't think I've ever seen a perfectly round lefse in my entire existence. Now, for us, we have some specialized lefse making tools. We actually have a patented lefse stick, as well as a lefse grill. But you could theoretically just use a spatula and a griddle. And for the griddle, you're going to want to heat it up to 400 degrees. Once your griddle has been heated to 400 degrees, just slap your lefse on there and cook it until it's done. It'll be a nice golden brown look. You can tell that it's getting just about right when you'll see little bubbles forming on top of the lefse. And then you just, to flip it. And it's pretty flexible, so you can check really easily. You can just give it a little peek and then toss it over. And then once it's done, it's good. It's done. It's good to eat. Mine actually, it's actually worth tasting the way it is right now. You could just rip a little piece of it off and give it a taste. It should be nice and flexible. As long as we've done everything right, it should be, you should be able to just roll it up into little taquito-looking things. And at this point, you can cook whatever kind of meat is your favorite, be it beef or chicken or pork. Virtually anything goes good on lefse. Anything that you think would go good on a tortilla, it'll be beautiful for this. Now, you can go all traditional, where you would literally just season it with some salt and maybe a couple sprigs of herbs or something, but I think it's safe to say we've made major strides in seasoning since the Viking Age. I mean, we managed to steal some livestock in the last raid, so I'm just going to make some tacos al pastor, some nice pork tacos, some Mexican street taco meat. But obviously you can do it however you want. Anything will be great. Anything would be good. Now, I will have a recipe for the tacos al pastor that we're making today in the description and /or on the website, because we have one of those fancy things. I'm just going to go ahead and cook that up, and we'll be back to taste the fruits of our labors in a bit. See you in a second. All right, so.
I'm gonna grab one of these.
So yeah. we've been at this all day.
I know.
So while that might have been 10 minutes for you, it's been like, it was literally light outside when we started.
Yeah.
But not that it takes that long normally. It's just that we ran into some technical issues. So now we're finally getting to sit down and eat. Ooh, that's still real hot.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll get Mother's taste test. Obviously, I already tasted it and I freaking loved it. This is like some real good stuff.
All right.
We'll see what Mom thinks. Okay.
Yum.
Well,
Really good.
the Lefse is so soft. It's almost like when you eat flour tortillas at a Mexican restaurant, you can kind of taste the tortilla, but you're mostly tasting what's in there. I feel like I taste the Lefse a lot more than I do a flour tortilla.
I love, this is my favorite now. Growing up, we just put cinnamon and sugar on it and butter or lingonberries. But putting meat in it and every other thing like that, that is really good.
Yeah, that's another thing that makes it kind of more like a tortilla than... Because like tortillas, they use them for everything. They use them for dessert. They use them for... We use them for dessert. Or for just... It's so multi-purpose. And it's easy to make and it's really, really good. Like, it's not... Even when you have flour tortillas, it's not the same unless you make it at home. This is even better. And it's not the same unless you make it at home. This stuff is really, really good. You wouldn't think a tortilla would just make that huge of a difference, but it really does.
Growing up in our Scandinavian home, when I was young, we never had anything to drink, be it water, milk, my parents having their beer or drinks. They would never have anything to drink without saying, Skål.
Skål. And we'll see you next time for the feast.